All right, good evening.
Good evening.
Let's get started with a word of prayer tonight. Father, thank you for safety and you watch care over us. Thank you for bringing Corey through his surgery. It sounds like he is doing well and might be able to get to come home here pretty soon. Pretty incredible, the advances in medicine and the talents and abilities that you have given to some people. Helps us to be ever mindful of it. And pray for a family of Dawson as got the funeral tomorrow, and I know a lot of folks there that are hurting over a life that seems like it has gone far too soon. But please use this as an opportunity to spread the gospel among some of the kids that he knew and maybe some extended family members that may not have known, and that something good can come from a tragedy such as this. Pray that you would touch our hearts with your word tonight as we continue looking at the reality, and tonight we look at the reality of our relationships. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We have been studying in this little section how important it is to see reality for what it is. And a couple weeks ago, I shared with you a definition of reality, and a lot of people who choose to live in an alternate reality. I'm gonna make up my own rules, and then they get frustrated or lonely or hurt or whatever when life doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And tonight we're going to finish this section, and he'll develop some more of this later in the book. But there's three main relationships that are really important, and if we don't understand the reality of these relationships, life can be pretty frustrating too. The first one is the creator and the creature. I don't know if it bothers you, but when I hear people talk about God as the man upstairs or, something like that, it really, really bothers me. That's an arrogance, I think, on our part where we minimalize him because he seems more manageable. And part of that is the fact that someone doesn't really understand who the creator is, and they don't really understand that they're the creature. And he has a good statement in the book. He says, when man contemplates God and his works, he is aware of the enormous distance between himself and his creator. We use that term transcendence. He is so far above and beyond his creation. Transcendence, simply, God is exalted above creation, and a lot of times we think, well, that's a physical distance. It means that heaven is really far away from here. But that's not true. If you remember our doctrine study, God is omnipresent. And so even though, yes, he is in heaven, it doesn't mean that he is solely in heaven, and so he is really distant from us. That's not what it's talking about. It is talking about the quality of being. So when he tells us, be ye holy, for I am holy, and you look at that and you say, well, I can be holy too. But if you look at our level of holiness compared to our Creator's level of holiness, there is a transcendence there that makes you realize, no matter what, I'm never going to be this. And so that's what we're talking about here when we talk about having thinking and meditating on the reality of the creature versus the creator. Meditation on God's transcendence promotes his greatness. And I think that's something that's lacking in Christian circles today. I don't think folks spend near enough time meditating and thinking about the greatness of God. In fact, I think there's a whole lot of stuff in modern Christianity that really minimalizes him to a point that's extremely dangerous in our thinking. And when we minimalize him, then it's easy to compartmentalize him. I'll bring God out on Sunday, or I'll bring God out on Wednesday night, but he doesn't belong in Monday, Tuesday, my work day on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And you see a lot of young people who act that way. If you start a religious conversation with some young people, they'll tell you how excited they are to go to church and the camp that they went to this summer and whatever they did and this and that and the other and how active they are in their youth group, and they're all excited. And then 10 minutes later, they'll be talking with their friends and you'll overhear them doing some of the craziest stuff, and you say, I don't understand. How does this life and this life go together? And part of the reason for that is they haven't spent any time meditating on that creator and creature. And so God isn't great and grand and glorious and transcendent in their eyes. Instead, he's like a friend or a brother or a sister. And sadly enough, a lot of folks nowadays just manipulate people. And so why not manipulate God too? Because he fits into the same relationship that a lot of other relationships fit into. But that is not true of him. One of the important things about this creator-creature thing is it answers a fundamental basic question. Where did I come from? And when you hear people who are all worked up, and there's a pretty wide array of emotional disorders that come from a misunderstanding of where I come from. I want to look at a couple of verses here to kind of put in perspective. And we'll start off with one that we've talked about a couple of times. John 1 and verse 3 says, all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Now, I know it's simple, and I know we've talked about it before, but you think about it for just a second. If you're going to have the proper creator-creature relationship, then you have to realize that all things were made by him, therefore I am subject to him. But he also goes on and says, and without him was not anything made that was made. And so as you look around you in the world, sometimes we get so self-centered that we don't pay attention to what God is trying to reveal about himself by the way the whole world works. Romans chapter 1, verse 19 and 20. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. Now, this one brings out another aspect. It's not just the aspect that he made everything, but it's also the aspect that when we don't ponder this relationship and realize the greatness of God, we're actually acting in ignorance. And it's a choice. That's what he says here. And we can act like he is not our creator and we are not responsible to him. But the verse says God is going to treat ungodliness a certain way. And so, I don't know about you, but I used to think of ungodliness as absolute filthiness. And I was studying the word one time for Bible class. I had a young man who asked me a question. And so I spent a couple of days and did a little study on the term ungodly in the Bible. And what I found out is it's simple. Without God. That's all it means. And so when the Bible wants to talk about all the filthy little sins running around, it uses stuff like lasciviousness or hatred or variance or whatever. But this word is a special word because it simply characterizes folks who make the decision to live their life without God. And then all the other words describe the consequences of those actions and those choices. And so what he's saying here is, if you're not going to ponder for a little while, this thing here, the wrath of God is going to be revealed from heaven against all ungodliness, those that have chosen to live their lives without God, and as a consequence are unrighteous. And they hold the truth in unrighteousness. It's not that they don't know better, it's just that they've chosen not to do better. For sake of time, I want you to think for just a minute, Job 38 through 41, all those chapters. If you want to ponder the greatness of God sometime, just sit down and think about Job chapter 38 through Job chapter 41, where he is giving a science, history, theology lesson to Job. Job, where were you when I created? Where were you when I? Where were you when I? Where were you when I? And think about all the things that just go into the water cycle. I mean, so intricately involved with wind and with temperature and with all different kinds of things and how they interact. If God is so detailed that he created all those things, controls all those things, and uses them for our good, then it should teach us something about our relationship with him. Solomon said, you look at the lilies of the field and you look at the birds and God takes care of them. Why doesn't that translate to your relationship with him? Because the creator-creature relationship between a bird or a flower and the creator is the same with you, only he didn't send his son Jesus Christ to die for the birds or the flowers. And so when we ponder the greatness of God, it gives us some perspective and it helps us a little bit with our humility. Second relationship, father and son. The result of understanding the Father's complete and perfect love for his children will be a growing sense of security and humility. Go to John chapter 1 and verse 12. John 1:12. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. Such a foreign concept to a Jewish person. Their entire religious system was about separation from God and yet having a right relationship with him. And so what an incredible sense of comfort here. I want you to go to Romans chapter 8 and look at verses 14 through 18, because he's going to add to what John says. And he adds a pretty interesting thing. Not only is there a lot of comfort in this passage, but there's also perspective in this passage. In Romans 8, verse 14, for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. For ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but ye have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. We don't have the time to dig into this passage. There is so much here. It's, this is a situation like Paul layering a cake over and over and over again. But he starts off here and he says, you are the sons of God. Now, a son has certain benefits from a father that a foreigner doesn't have. And that's why this was such a stumbling block to the Jewish people. If you're family, there are certain benefits to the family, and that's what he starts out. But look at the first one that he mentions, because this is not only a comfort, but it's fantastic perspective. He says, ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear. In other words, what he's asking them is, in your practical Christian life, why are you so afraid of all these different things? Because that is not what Jesus Christ wants you to be. He does not want you to live a fearful life. Instead, look at the answer. He says, but ye have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. What is the answer to fear? Cry out to Dad. How many times when you were young and something startled you, did you go running to Mom and Dad? I heard something or I did, and they did what? They didn't laugh at you or make fun of you or embarrass you. They comforted you. That is exactly the picture that we have here. You are a son. And as a son, you can find comfort in the Father. So he doesn't want you to live in fear. He wants you to live in comfort. Now let's go back to the other relationship, the creator-creature. If you have been meditating on that and pondering the reality of how great God is, and then you link this Father-Son to it, if God is great in your thinking, and he is great in your eyes because you have been meditating on that relationship, there should be a lot of comfort in this relationship. Because that same greatness is now available to me practically in whatever it is that I face. That's what he's saying here. Well, don't run around and be scared and be all bent out of shape and worked up over something. Take comfort in the fact that God is in control and he loves you and he wants what's best for you. And then he's going to go one step farther. And if you're children, then heirs. Now, being a child is one thing, because a child, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, gets disciplined and gets, all these other things. But an heir is someone who is getting ready to inherit great things from him. Now, back to the former relationship. If I have been meditating and pondering on the greatness of God, and I think about the fact that not only can I find comfort from that greatness, but now he's going to take it a step farther and he's going to say, listen, all the things that I give to my son Jesus Christ, I'm going to make you a joint heir. Okay, start pondering all the things that are available to you from God. How in the world is that not comfortable? Meditation on this one answers the question, where am I going? You say, how is that? Because if you understand the love of the Father, then you ought to understand that he said, where I am, there you will be also. Sometimes we get dealt with as children. Think about the conversation and their relationship in the prayer. We won't take the time to turn there, but in Matthew 6:9, he is teaching the disciples to pray, and he says, what? Our Father, which art in heaven. And then he starts talking about doctrine. Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And then he talks about his needs. Give us this day our daily bread. He talks about our interpersonal relationships. Help us to be forgiving because you have forgiven us. An important part of this relationship is the ability for us to be able to converse with God at any time, anywhere, any place. And a loving father is willingly wanting to listen to his child. Doesn't matter if it's a good day or a bad day or whatever, he wants to listen to his child and he wants to help him. Then Hebrews chapter 12 talks about discipline. Listen, if you are a child of God, you can expect that he is going to discipline you because he wants what's best for you. So he's not going to let you run off and make these poor choices. They're going to, have bad consequences. Ephesians 4:13 through 15 talks about, well, let's go there real quickly. I know it's hard on a Wednesday night. We don't have a lot of time. Ephesians 4:13 through 15. Till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. That we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men, and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love may grow up unto him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. Now, what's interesting is, when you have really young children, they have absolutely no idea how good they have it. They know they love mom and dad. They know mom and dad love them. They don't understand what it takes to pay an electric bill and a water bill and insurance. And, you run out and you get in the vehicle and mom and dad drives down the road and they fall asleep in the car or play a game or read a book or whatever. They have no thought about how to get from point A to point B. They have no worries about whether there's gas in the car or whether the tires are working or whether it needs an oil change. No. When you are a really young child, none of that matters. But as you grow, don't you have to start learning those things? Because eventually when you're a teenager and mom and dad hand you the keys and tell you can drive to school, you better make sure there's enough gas in the vehicle. You better make sure there's air in the tires. And then you start to become a young adult, and I'm an adult now, but at the same time, you're still enjoying a lot of the benefits of being a child because you're still not paying for everything. You might be paying for some of your bills, but if you're living at home still, you're not paying for all your bills. And then eventually you get to the point where you move out and you're on your own. And listen, if mom and dad did a good job, you can successfully live on your own because during that growing up process, they taught you how to live on your own. That's exactly the picture that's going on here. He says, only instead of teaching you how to have a job and how to pay your bank accounts, I am going to teach you how to be godly and righteous in an unrighteous world. It's called coming into the fullness of Christ. And you can't really be successful as a Christian until you start to realize everything that you have in Jesus Christ. Meditation on the father-son relationship promotes the goodness of God, because I start to realize how good he really is to me. And by the way, the more it promotes the goodness of God in my life, the more it promotes gratitude and appreciation also. Because I start to realize it costs something for this and this and this. Sometimes when kids are just handed everything their whole life long, there's no gratitude or appreciation because they don't understand the sacrifice that goes into it. But if God is maturing us to the fullness of the stature of Jesus Christ, then we begin to realize that everything we have in Jesus Christ came at a pretty high cost, and that's the cross of Calvary. Third relationship, master-servant. I know it's not politically correct, it's biblically correct. God has redeemed us. That's deliverance from the penalty of sin. Someday we will have deliverance from the presence of sin. He is currently working on being delivered from the power of sin. So when I sin because I choose to. I don't have to. He has delivered me from the power of that sin. He will, with a temptation, make a way to escape it. The question is, do I take the way to escape it? The logical response to this love is grateful surrender as a bond slave. Now, sometime you want to do a really interesting study in God's Word, study that term, bond slave, under rower. Everybody's getting so bent out of shape and burning down cities and everything because everybody's got all these special rights. It's interesting to me, the term servant in the New Testament is not really a biblical term. It's a politically correct term. The real term is bondservant, slave. A bondservant, an under-rower, was the person in the bottom of the galley, not the top row of the galley, the person in the bottom of the galley. And if the ship went down, you had like zero chance that you were getting out of there, because even if they started unchaining people at the top, it would take way too long to get all the way to the bottom to let you loose. All the nasty went down there. You say, well, that's not a very pleasant picture of Christianity. Maybe that's why Jesus kept telling his disciples, and while he was teaching everybody, and he'd say, come and follow me, for my burden is what? He said it was light, right? He didn't say it was grievous. Now, if you looked at a Roman slave and they were an under-rower, you would look at that situation and say, I don't know, that's pretty grievous work. And Jesus Christ is saying, while the term applies that that's the kind of relationship that we ought to have, an indentured servant, a bond servant, he's saying, I am not the kind of master that a lot of people are, not oppressive, and if you go back to the two relationships before that, and you've been focusing on the goodness of God, and you've been focusing on the greatness of God, then you look at the love of God and you say, why wouldn't I want to serve that? Romans 1:1, Galatians 1:10, Philippians 1:1. You know what they all have in common? I, Paul, a bondslave of Jesus Christ. That's how he starts out those. James 1:1 starts out the same way. 2 Peter 1:1 starts out the same way. A bond slave of Jesus Christ, a bond slave of Jesus Christ. You say, man, you start naming these men, you're talking about what folks would consider to be the upper echelon. But how many times did Paul say, I am the chiefest among sinners? That wasn't false humility. It was actually a statement based on the fact that he has spent a lot of time pondering the creator-creature relationship, the father-son relationship, and now the master-servant relationship. And when he looks at those three relationships, his heart would just melt and say, why in the world would God ever choose me? Because I am the chiefest among sinners. Maybe that's why in Romans 12:1 and 2 it says, present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. He doesn't say it's heavy service. He doesn't say, wow, that's asking a lot, Lord. Well, if somebody is looking at that situation and saying, I don't want to surrender to God's will, he would send me to Bula Bula as a missionary. You have not spent enough time pondering the proper relationship with God, or you wouldn't think that. You would think, because of what he had to do on the cross of Calvary to pay for my sin, he has the right to send me anywhere he wants to, and he has the right to ask me anything. I mean, he has forgiven me so much. What in the world? There's no basis for me to claim a right. There's no basis for me to claim a privilege, considering what he has done. This answers the question, why am I here? Meditating on God's great love for me results in dedicating my life to him, and that motivates me to be productive for him. After all, it's only my reasonable service. I want to close tonight in Ephesians 4. He says here in verse 16, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. When I understand the master-servant relationship, I understand that God didn't make junk. He makes everybody with different talents and abilities and likes and dislikes. And when he brings that group of people together they can accomplish everything. Every joint, everything fit together so that it works properly. But if you have one person who is arrogant and says, I don't know, I don't like this master-servant relationship. I haven't been reflecting on the love of God. I don't think that's why I want to be a Christian. I just wanted fire insurance and make sure I get out of hell. Then you're going to have a dysfunctional body because you're going to have somebody's talents and abilities that are missing from the working body. 3 relationships: creator-creature, the father-son, the master-servant. And when we meditate it and when we think about it, God's greatness comes out, God's goodness comes out, God's love comes out. Isn't it kind of weird that when you ponder the fact that he is the master and you are the bond slave, you start to realize that he loves you? You wouldn't think that in a normal human relationship. You'd say, well, if you really love me, set me free. But then you'd be a servant of sin. And that's far worse.